Training. What do you mean?
A very good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of ISMI Social Auditors Organization. With addressing to all the gathering, I request to everyone to please turn on their cameras. Thank you. And we are here with our faculty guest, Surya Dipta Das sir. He is a sustainability and ESG professional with expertise in spanning renewable energy, environmental law, impact investing, and data science. And he's currently associated with Ethos Flow, who is organization an online platform that helps organization accesses the ESG maturity of their suppliers and business partners and turn that insight into a clear customized corrective action plan without the usual cost effort and complexity. So warm welcome, sir, and very good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
So over to you, sir. You may begin with the session.
Sure. All right. Thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone who's present here today. So the topic for discussion, as you would have seen, is the value chain ESG assessment. And I have some slides to take you through on what exactly, I mean when I say value chain assessments and how exactly are we doing that for different companies. I hope the screen is visible. Right.
Yes, it is visible, sir.
Sure. Okay. Are you seeing this black ribbon? I was thinking if there's a way to remove it. Mhm. Okay. Okay. I'll just keep it here. Fine. Okay. So the product that I'm going to talk about today, it's called Ethos Flow. And what basically it is a exactly value chain sustainability maturity assessment platform, which will cover what exactly are the value chain requirements that we are talking about, what the challenges are in doing the maturity assessments, and how exactly we are trying to solve that for different companies globally. The first thing that we should talk about is what exactly do we mean by value chain sustainability and why at all it's becoming important and why am I here to talk about it today. So now over the last few years, as we have seen a lot of growing importance of ESG in India through the SEBI's BRSR requirements, the business responsibility and the sustainability reporting, and we have seen a lot of reporting requirements crop up in Europe, similarly in Australia, in America, and all over the world. One of the things that has become very common is requiring disclosures not just inside the direct operation of the companies, but also about their value chain, something that is in their indirect operation, which they do not influence or control directly, but something that is considered to be a overall footprint of the organization, and that's becoming quite important. So, like I said, if you would look at regulations, so of course, the SEBI's regulation, the Reserve Bank of India, they're coming up with climate risk requirements, which is not just in your direct operation, but also in your value chain. So, primarily the suppliers in the upstream and also your downstream customers. And depending on the different industries, it varies. Like the value chain is complicated in some cases in the upstream, in some in downstream. So, it varies across industries and sectors. And the regulations are now requiring are giving a lot of emphasis on that. If we look at the different reporting frameworks or the standards that we had over the last several years in this ESG or sustainability space. The famous ones like the GRI, the IFRS foundations is, frameworks, the Sustainable Development Goals, the UNGC, the PRI. So all these are now moving not just to the direct reporting requirements, but also for reporting requirements on the value chain. And same for the ESG ratings. Few of those are listed here. So that is the landscape that we are seeing over the last couple of years. And specifically, if I talk about the SEBI's requirement, as part of the annual disclosure, now they require the disclosures on several ESG parameters. And few years ago, they mandated that from 24-25, so from this year, the value chain disclosures would become essential. Otherwise, companies who are not disclosing those, they will have to, explain on a, they have to explain why they are, excluding those disclosures. So now in the global backdrop, those regulations have been pushed back by a couple of years because companies are pretty much struggling to meet all these requirements all of a sudden. The challenge that that we see. So if I look at the BRSR's questions, what exactly are they asking on value chain, right? So if you will look at the different principles across the different sections, they ask on disclosures that how much percentage has the entity, assessed as a percentage of the value chain partners by the value of business that has been done with such partners in monetary terms, on different aspects like health and safety, on working conditions. So these are clearly the social aspects. On environmental aspects also, they're requiring similar questions to be disclosed on. They're asking about sexual harassment, discrimination, child labor, forced labor, fair wages, and so on. And it's not only about disclosing what percentage of the value chain you have assessed as a part of the overall procurement spend, but also what were the risks or the challenges that you found in that assessment, and how are you managing that. So what is the corrective action plan that you are providing for your value chain partners and for yourself at a overall group level to mitigate those risks that you discovered when you did the assessment. So that was about the SEBI's requirement that is going to become mandatory very soon in the next 1 year. Now, if we look at the PRI's framework, so this is for the private market investors, this framework. And there also, if we look at the different stages of investment, in the second stage, the early due diligence screening stage, or the more detailed due diligence stages, the ones which I've highlighted specifically, you would see that a lot of emphasis now is being focused on those value chain partners. So they're asking, if there is any self-assessment questionnaire that the portfolio companies primarily, they are having to report on. Is there a supplier code of conduct or a dedicated policy for that? Are you also screening for media allegations or live news for the portfolio companies when you're doing this due diligence? Are you doing any third-party risk assessment? So these are a bit more, of a leading practice that you're not just doing it yourself, but for improved credibility, you're also now employing some third-party risk assessment. Are there any screens for sanctions at the supplier level? Are there any product level screening, certification standards, and so on to highlight the credibility of those disclosures? In the third stage, the due diligence stage, you would see a similar kind of requirement about the risk exposure and the maturity assessment, in-house or through a third party. What are the documents based on which you're doing that assessment? Because it cannot only be a yes or no kind of a response, but it has to be substantiated through credible documentation, and so on. So in the fourth stage, again, a very similar kind of a trend that we see, that the environmental and the social action plan. So the trend is pretty clear as we see it in the last couple of years, that now companies are having to disclose, the listed companies for sure are now having to assess their value chain partners on several environmental, social, and governance aspects, few of which we saw. And even the private market players who are uh, who are signatories to the PRI, the Principle for Responsible Investment, they are also now giving a lot of emphasis on this ESG due diligence when they're doing the screening and the investment decision making. So, having said all that, given a background of where things are moving and the importance that the market regulators are now giving to the ESG assessments, uh, what exactly is the challenge in doing that? So many companies that we have seen over the last few years and whom we have spoken with, they highlight three of these challenges repeatedly. So one is that, companies are saying that, okay, I have maybe 20 or 30 tier one suppliers. So suppliers I'm directly doing business with, and they pretty much sum up to maybe 80% or 70% of my procurement spend. So they are my major suppliers. So for them, I can still consider doing, these ESG assessments through some kind of a spreadsheet or data collection or something. But when I'm trying to do it at scale for my tier two or tier three and so on, business partners, so that becomes pretty much impossible for me, right? How can I do, this assessment for so many of these business partners, and that too in such a little amount of time? The second thing that they say very frequently is that, the purchase team, who are dealing with all these business partners, they do not have the understanding of ESG. What exactly is that? They understand cost, quality, those traditional procurement aspects, but the ESG aspects are very new to them. So they do not understand that, and they don't have the bandwidth. Like they are a small team, and to do the assessment for so many of the business partners, that's practically not possible given the bandwidth that they already have occupied with other things. And third, so suppose they have the bandwidth and they are understanding the subject and everything, but despite that, it's not only about data collection, right? For doing the assessment, so the assessment starts primarily after the data collection. So what is it that we derive the insight from, right? So what insights are we deriving from the data that we have? How to make sense of it? Is it good? Is it bad? So suppose someone is saying that, okay, I have X ton of waste which is being generated. So what do I make a sense of it? Is X good? Is it bad? Right. So there needs to be a kind of normalization, a benchmarking to make sense of that data. And ultimately, based on that and based on the different sectors of my suppliers. So some may be suppliers who are doing a service, consulting service. So for them, of course, I do not think that GHG emission would be, for example, something very important. Rather, someone who's manufacturing goods for me, for them, it would be important. So it cannot be a uniform kind of a process, right? It has to be customized to each business partner, depending on the nature of their service or their product. And also it has to be normalized and made sense of in terms of the national and the international peers. And doing all these things with such a limited team and bandwidth, that's pretty much impossible, and given the timelines. So that is where we are at with most of the companies. They're pretty much struggling to do a credible assessment, given all these constraints. So this is where, our solution basically comes in, so that different companies, who want to do this assessment in a very credible and authentic way, and they want to really drive meaningful progress, they can avail this platform, ethos flow, that we have developed over the past few years. And what ethos flow primarily is that, so it's a website hosted platform. You can visit the website at any point of time. If you go to this link, www.ethosflow.com. So you can visit it at any point of time. And it's primarily a very low cost, on demand, so you can do it at any point of time, value chain maturity assessment platform that allows organizations to assess all these different environmental, social, and governance aspects of their business partners. So it could be suppliers for some companies, for manufacturing companies, it could be the portfolio companies for financial institutes, and so on. And ultimately, the goal is this entire burden of assessing the value chain partners, explaining to them that what is it that that needs to be provided as evidence, what kind of information we are looking for, and ultimately recommending them that how you should go about closing the gaps with a dedicated roadmap over the next 1 or 2 years or something, uh, ongoing monitoring and support. So all these things, they can outsource this headache by visiting this platform, and we will do all those, and they will get a dashboard which has all this information that okay, so many suppliers were assessed, for example. These are the areas where they are weak. There could be a potential risk of non-compliance, there could be a potential risk of customer reputation or stuff, and this is how you should improve. So all those things we will do for the company so that they can do these assessments at scale and with credibility. Now, why exactly do we need another platform for this? What exactly are the challenges that it's solving? I've explained that, of course, for so long, but ultimately just laying it all down on one slide. So the first thing, of course, is the compliance is being met. So now that the regulations are moving towards mandatory disclosure requirements, so the listed companies, of course, they can be compliant to the SEBI's requirements by having these disclosures. Even many of the ISO standards, the quality standards 9001, that is also integrating some of the climate change related requirements inside that. And the reporting frameworks or the ESG ratings, everybody, whatever value chain related disclosure is required anywhere in this world, globally, any framework, any geography, everything is being covered through this assessment. So that's the good thing, that one assessment you do in 1 year, and all those disclosures, all the hassle is being taken care of. Secondly, uh, the process of assessment uh, is developed through academia and industry experts. So we have formed a working group when we did this, and we took a lot of insights. We iterated the approach several times, and then we arrived at this methodology, which is proprietary to us, and that has all these insights fed in from the best of the industry leaders, so that what we are doing is actually practical and feasible. The third thing is about credibility. We had seen also previously that in few of the frameworks, the PRI one as well as the BRSR one, they are specifically asking that whether you're employing a third party to do the assessment. And why that is important is because it naturally adds a bit more credibility. And now that the SEBI's requirements are also saying that you should do an assurance on these value chain disclosures. So this third party credibility is becoming a big differentiator over the next few years. The fourth aspect is that we have a mechanism to do rigorous document checks. So in our platform, we have checks and bounds, so that what we see typically is whenever we ask a question or some kind of information from a value chain partner, and typically when they do not have that, so there is a kind of a trend that they make up some documents, they write some ad hoc things, and then they present it as an evidence. But through this platform, we are making sure that whatever disclosures we are taking as evidence, those are credible. There are rigorous document checks to make sure that it's coming from the right authorities, it has the management sign off, and it's actually not just a piece of paper which was built only for the purpose of the submission. The next thing is that this platform pretty much requires the least effort by any company to use and to do their assessments. So why that is because over here, any company who wants to assess the value chain partners on ESG and really follow on this path of sustainable journey, So they have to go to the website, they have to invite their value chain partner by putting in certain details, like what is the name of the value chain partner's company, what is the name of that person, his email ID, and that's it, 3, 4 data points. And that's pretty much it. From there onwards, the platform entirely takes over. They send a automatic email to the value chain partner by marking you in CC, and they onboard the partner. They take them through a guided questionnaire, explain to them that what are the different documents that is required, the timelines, everything. So any kind of advisory, handholding support, on call support, clarification calls over videos, or repeated calls with their management to understand what exactly the requirements are, all those follow up hassles. So all those is taken care of by us. So the company is just inviting the partner, and after a period of time, about 4 to 6 weeks on an average, they will get the ready-made disclosures and the dashboard, which shows them insights about all these assessments and how the performance was. Uh, the important thing is that the three-layer verification which we talk about is uh, it's not a AI powered or only a machine-led kind of an assessment. It takes it has humans in the loop. So there is a lot of software flagging, of course, which is happening, the media screening for information, database integrations in the backend. So all those are happening. But on top of that, we do have the human analyst and the reviewer who are putting I would say putting that level of trust when they're communicating with the partners, explaining to them that what are the exact requirements, I mean how best they can come out in the assessment given the present situation and given the data that they have, because it's very unexpected that they will undertake undue efforts in a very short amount of time. So all those hand holding is also important and is provided through human intervention, so that this assessment is not like a exam, but more like an opportunity for the business partners to highlight their positive impacts on the business. The second last aspect is about the simplified questionnaire. We have seen that many of the value chain partners, they are not some of the not all are the listed companies are not that mature in terms of the ESG practices, and many are even SMEs. So we have built the questionnaire to be so simple and so concise while being credible at the same time. Which so that it serves both purposes. It's simple to fill out, takes maximum 1 to 2 hours of time, but then again, it's not like a tick mark based kind of an assessment. It's really credible, it's deep, and it has a detailed methodology for assessment. So I'll come to those details later. The last and the most important thing is that we have strict internal controls in place to make sure that whatever data our platform is being fed, those are all safe. They can only be accessed by few specific IPs, and it's not downloadable. And there are several checks and bounds in place to make sure that it's compliant to the data privacy piece, and that's a big concern, right? So we take care of all those concerns through this platform when we do the assessment. Now, coming to the next slide is about, when I say ESG assessment that I've been saying for, so long. So what exactly, am I assessing? What exactly are the topics or the modules that I have? What comes inside ESG, right? So there are broadly 5 modules that we have on environment, procurement, ethics, labor, health and safety and stuff, as you see on the screen. And there are different topics inside each of those modules. So the environment module, that's very much like the E part of the ESG bit. So it has several topics, the common ones like the GHG, the renewable energy, wastewater, biodiversity, non-GHG air emissions, and also climate hazards and resilience, specifically the physical hazards. So any kind of physical climate events, for example, thunderstorm or wildfires, flooding, those things, we are assessing that how vulnerable your physical assets are, and what is the kind of preparedness that you have in place to combat those. So all those are actually being considered inside this module, the environment. And it's also important again to remind you that we understand for every single partner, it's not that every single of these topics would be equally important, right? For some, biodiversity, for example, might not even be relevant. They're not even coming into interaction with any kind of, flora or fauna, which can be affected by their type of operation. So for those kind of, assessments, of course, the prioritization and the, consideration of these individual topics will be accordingly modified and adjusted too. So that's all taken care of by the platform. The second thing is around procurement. The interesting thing is that, a listed company, for example, they are buying from one of their suppliers, suppose some component from one of their suppliers, and they have their own, code of conduct, lots of clauses on environment related considerations, lots of clauses on social considerations and stuff. Even then, if their tier 2 supplier, the supplier from which their supplier is in turn procuring from, if they do not have the right practices in place, they do not have the policies and they do not have the considerations, uh, it's it's practically trickling down in that company's supply chain as well, because of their tier 2 suppliers. So that is why this module specifically looks at the environmental social considerations of the value chain partner, so that they in turn can, make sure that their procurements are more environmental and socially conscious, and naturally the tier 2, tier 3 and so on effects can be mitigated to a great deal. Preference is also required to be given to local sourcing wherever applicable, given all the other criteria like quality, time, cost, those things are comparable. So we are also giving priority to the supply diversity and local sourcing and all those considerations when we are doing the assessment. The next module is on ethics and environmental and information security. So of course, like the topic says, so it's more around the ethical considerations that we're looking for, primarily doing some, governance related documents checks, such as anti-bribery and corruptions and, all those typical ethical considerations, discrimination and stuff. And also information security, again, something very, very important, especially when we look at, the tech sector. The importance of these, like I said again, it will be calibrated depending on the SSE and their kind of business. The next module is around the labor and the CSR. So when I say labor, I'm referring to both the employees of the company, the permanent employees, as well as the contractual workers. So their, management, so their representation, wages, their career development opportunities, all those things are assessed in this particular module. And the CSR aspect of the company, if it's applicable to them, the charity, community well-being, all those things are assessed. For health, safety, and working condition, which is the last module. So there also we are assessing, the employees' health and safety and the working condition, depending on, the kind of business. So for a few particular industries, that is quite important, the working conditions. And the customer health and safety. So for product-based companies, especially in the chemical sector and stuff, uh, at the end of life, the product that might have some kind of influence on the customers, and this is that module, which assesses those particular aspects as well. So to summarize, all these things through these 5 modules and the different topics that you can see on the screen. So all the ESG related requirements that any framework or any ESG rating or any regulation requires globally, it's all being covered through all
Sir,
these modules and topics.
can I ask you one question? There is no governance in this module.
Yeah, so for governance considerations, the ethical considerations, the board related considerations like diversity, those things are actually covered under different topics. We have not named the module as governance, but those considerations are covered through this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. For now, we saw the different modules and the different topics in the last page, right? So sorry. It's going- In the last page, we saw the modules, we saw the topics. Now, in this slide, we will talk about the pillars, the assessment pillars. So for each module, for example, environment, we have uh, waste, for example. So inside waste, so for each topic, we have 8 pillars based on which we are doing the assessment. So when we talk about waste, so what we are looking at, for example, is we are looking at if there is a policy around the waste management. And this policy is not like, do you have a policy or you don't? And it's not a binary kind of a response. It has a tiered kind of a maturity grading based on the quality of the policy. So if you don't have a policy, of course, that's a low maturity thing anyway. But if you have a policy, so we look into a qualitative assessment that, is the policy referencing international frameworks? Is there a sign off from the management? How granular is the policy? Does it have mention of specific goals or targets? All those kind of detailed things we're looking at depending on the quality of the policy, and not a binary yes or a no. Similarly, we look at actions. So if you're saying that, the policy says that waste reduction is one of the things that we are focusing on, what actions, have you taken in terms of minimizing waste, for example, or in terms of minimizing the environmental impact through GHG emissions? So that is something that we are also considering. If there is any target, naturally, if there is a time, the targets need to be smart, right? The specific, measurable, actionable, time bound, those kind of targets. So if you have that, that's actually a good thing. But even if you don't have that, what is the present target? What is the rationale behind that? Is it at par with what the other similar businesses are doing nationally and internationally? That is again something that we're looking at when we're looking at the targets filling. And if you have a target, what is the progress towards the target? So that is another thing, because many companies have a target, and then again, the progress is not, that impressive when we see over the years. So that is again something that we are looking at. The governance, like I said. So the governance pillar is something that is embedded inside each of these topics. So governance cannot sit only as a topic in isolation. So it has to be an all-encompassing thing. So for each of the topic, for waste, what is the governance that is there? For GAG, what is the governance? For social impact, for the labor management, what is the kind of governance? For health and safety. So all for each of the topics, the governance of that particular topic is also being assessed as part of it. If there is any audit, any internal or external audit that gives credibility to the numbers or the disclosures that is being provided as evidence. So that is again an important thing, because naturally, if there is audited data available, of course, that's much more credible. Uh, the next thing is about reporting. So if you're already disclosing a lot of information through the annual report, through maybe a sustainability report, through several website related disclosures which are out there. So that is actually a good kind of a credible information that we can also extract as part of the assessment process. So the reporting that you're doing for other investors or for other stakeholders, that is also taken into consideration for each of these topics. And most important part is the coverage. So the reporting, for example, you may have a business that has 10 facilities, but when you're disclosing environmental metrics for only 6 of those facilities, for example, so that's a 60% coverage, right? That's not 100% coverage. So that coverage is also quite important, that how much of it do you have in your control, and what proportion of that are you disclosing? Now, naturally, all these things are being considered for each of the topics, for each of the modules. So modules, topics, and then the pillars. So naturally, we have, for each topic, we ask questions which are around these 8 pillars only. We don't ask anything other than this. We ask around these 8 pillars. We give a lot of space for free text explanation. Yeah, one important thing I would like to highlight, that the assessment allows the document uploads and a free text box for explaining that, okay, if suppose there was a performance drop, you're doing a good performance over the last 3 4 years, but suddenly in the last 2 years there was a drop. So you get an opportunity to explain that there. And if the rationale is correct, that why that is happening, or if suppose there is a business expansion which is affecting your intensity footprint over the last few years, so you get that opportunity to explain that. So it's not necessarily that it's a static kind of a document based assessment only, but we are also taking your perspective. And if you require a dedicated call, and if you want more clarifications to be given or more supporting documents, it's more than welcome. The goal being that the assessment is really credible, granular, and it's taking all these things into consideration and not just a static kind of a exchange. Now, we saw the modules, we saw the topics, and we also saw the pillars. Uh, this gives us a broad snapshot of the overall, methodology, that how are we putting it all together. So for each of the assessment modules, that's on the green in the left, we have the different topics. For example, for uh, labor, we have the learning and development, we have CSR, all those things. So three topics we had inside the labor and CSR. For each of the topics, we have the 8 pillars based on which we are doing the assessment. So we are checking if they have a policy, what are their actions, what are the targets, governance, audits, reporting, coverage, all those things we are checking. For based on your disclosure, the evidence and the justifications that you give, we arrive at a raw assessment. Now, this first level of raw assessment in gray is something which is based on a static rubric. So we have a methodology, it has a rubric which is inbuilt into the platform, that suppose if a person has uploaded a policy and that has XYZ, then it should be medium. If it says ABCD, it should be high maturity. So we have a static rubric based on which the raw assessment happens. Now, the second layer is the standardization or the normalization, as we say. Suppose there is a small company, a much smaller company, an SME, and they have a reasonably good environmental management policy. Now, that policy is considered in the context of what similar companies are doing. Similar in the sense that similar in size, in terms of revenue, they're in a certain bracket. In terms of employee strength, they're in a certain bracket. In terms of the nature of business, it's similar. So all those things are considered, and then we do a peer benchmark nationally and internationally to arrive at a normalization. And often we see that, okay, many small companies otherwise whose overall raw assessment would be low or a medium, they often undergo, most of the time they undergo a correction, and that medium maturity becomes a high maturity, because for their kind of business and their situation, that is quite good that they are doing. For example, uh, a listed big company, a big enterprise, they are often expected to have a specific decarbonization target with a roadmap. But for our SMEs, of course, we are not expecting that degree of granularity, and we do not, of course, expect them to have a science-based target, right? And we will not penalize them and say a low maturity just because they don't have a science-based target, which is very impractical to expect of them. So all this normalization happens in the second layer, and this is where a lot of data intelligence as well as human driven intelligence takes are taken into consideration to do this second layer of normalization. And thirdly, is this concept of materiality. So it's about what exactly is material to which business. So like I was saying, that inside environment, it's not like biodiversity would be very important for all kinds of businesses or all industries. It really varies depending on your geography, depending on the kind of business you have. If you're a paper and pulp in business, definitely biodiversity is very very important. But if you're a service provider, a consulting service provider, a financial service provider, for example, you're not even doing anything related to biodiversity, for all we know. So all those considerations, that okay, which topic should be given how much importance, which topic is relevant for who, all those things are actually happening in this third layer. So the raw assessment based on a static rubric, the normalization, the materiality, all these things are helping us arrive at the final maturity of each particular each module. So for environment, you will have a module level maturity, for health and safety, for social, for labors, so on and so forth. That's how, the broad level methodology works. Now coming to the last few slides, uh, what is it that the SSE gets out of all this? So they get a assessment report at the end of the assessment, right? So there are three components to the report. So the first component is a summary. So this summary clearly states, the module level maturity that we saw in the last slide after doing all those normalization, the materiality assessments and stuff. So for each of the module, you have a low, medium, or a high maturity. And inside each layer, there are two sub layers. So overall, you have 6 shades of maturity, and you're going to fall, somewhere in one of those 6 shades. And this assessment is valid, like I said, for a period for the entire year. So from the day of generation. So you do an assessment at any point of time in the year. This is valid for one entire year. And during this time, we will store the evidence documents on our platform. After that, it would be deleted unless you want us to still hold on to it for the next assessment when you do it next year. So that's a choice that assessees can have. So that's one part, the summary. And the customers dashboard, like who are inviting their suppliers, that will have all those dashboards and fancy charts and all to show that, okay, which how many of them have a low maturity, how many have a high, and so on. The second piece is the assessment report analysis. So this is a much more drill down analysis inside each module, each topic. For each topic, what is that standardized maturity that we have given? What is the materiality? Was so 0 or 1 is more like a binary. So if it's a materiality 1, it means that, okay, that topic was taken to be material or significant for my kind of a business, and 0 means it was not. So this drill down is something that they can see, and they can get a small, feedback of what is the interpretation. Is it good or bad? That's the second layer of analysis that they get, and this they will get for all the modules in detail. The third piece of the report, and the most important piece, is the corrective action plan. So based on the assessment, we will develop a customized action plan for every single assessee. And this is entirely human generated, and it's not a gap assessed kind of a thing based on a benchmark that we have set. So it's entirely made from scratch by human, and it's customized for every single assessee. And this assessment and this corrective action plan is designed to be very short. It has only 5 or 6 corrective actions that we are going to recommend. And these actions are practically feasible, so that there is very little investment, capital expenditure that is required. What can be practically doable in the next 6 months or 1 year, mostly targeting the low hanging fruits. And we will give the assessee an option that, if they want to set up a one-on-one call for clarifications, for understanding further that, how to do this. You're saying that, do GHG emission inventory, for example. So how to do that? What information is required to do that? All those things, any hand holding that they need, uh, they can have those clarification calls. The advisory support is also provided. That's what I'm saying, in addition to all these recommendations only, so that they can actually do some progress and not just do a assessment where the performance is static every year. The final slide, so where we talk about the distinctive features. So one thing that you would have seen is, we do not do a discrete kind of a scoring. So we will not say that out of 100 your score is 58 or 62. We do not do that kind of a specific scoring unless the client specifically wants that. If they want, of course we are happy to do that. Mostly we are trying to give a broad range, that where you're falling primarily. And why we shy away from giving a discrete scoring is because, when we're developing this scoring methodology, a lot of the final score depends on what weightage you're giving to every single topic, how much weightage you're giving to every module. And that is a very subjective thing. So even when we talk to different industry leaders and we talk to the academia, we realize that even inside same industry or even inside the same company, people have different perspectives and stuff. So that often becomes debatable. But the entire goal being that, the broad range, that where you're at and how you can achieve the next tier of the maturity improvement, that is That is the primary thing that companies care about, and not about any discrete score. So that is why by design, we do not do a discrete scoring, but a band kind of an assessment that where you're falling, unless the company specifically wants us to do a discrete scoring. Second is that, it's an intent based assessment. It's not meant to be a very quantitative heavy hassle for the SSE, because if you are asking for only quantitative information which are heavy on calculations, the SSE will have to devote a lot of time and effort to do this, and most of the time they won't really do that for this one assessment, and that could be challenging for most of them. So that's why we have kept it more as an intent based assessments. And of course, those people who are very mature and they have a lot of data, they are already providing all those evidences there, so no constraints on that. If you have already done it, you are most welcome to provide that. But the ultimate goal being that the intent is going in a positive direction, and over a period of few years you are actually able to show some marked improvement in the performance. The third thing, and the most important thing where we stand out, is that we have a personalized support for every single SSE. What we have seen that for doing a data collection, uh, kind of a thing, or getting a data from them, there is no need for a platform per se. That is something that even a Google Forms can do for a company. The challenge becomes explaining to the supplier, really hand holding them that what is required, how you can go about it, giving them repeated clarifications and follow up, and really helping them come up to the system by hand holding them throughout the process, giving them that support, so that it's not like a scary kind of a thing, but more like an opportunity for improvement. And that is where we see that the human touch is very much essential. It cannot only be replicated by a software. So that human and the software blended kind of a thing is what we do, and that personalized support is where we stand out. The conciseness of the questionnaire is something that I've spoken about, so won't repeat that again. It's very concise, and it's easy to use platform. And by clear documentation, the last one, what I mean is that for every uh, question that we are asking, for any kind of evidence we are asking, the platform has lots of information already built in. What I mean by that is, for each of the free text or each of the evidence, there are examples which is provided for every question, so that you can read through all those examples. You can understand that, okay, this is what they're asking over here. There are also information buttons and such UI designs in place, so that it's very interactive, easy to understand. And after all that, if you have questions, of course, anyone can call up the account manager of the SSC and get those clarified. So all these things are something, where we are devoting a lot of time, and not just, floating a questionnaire and doing a data collection thing, but it's more like actually moving the needle and improving on the maturity and really doing a credible job, not just for submission to any regulatory authority, but really making an impact and making a change. Yeah, so that's the entire purpose of the platform, and I think I was able to give you an understanding of why this topic is actually becoming quite important for all companies, listed as well as non-listed, even for startups now. The private market players, that's very important. And how exactly we are able to help the challenges, resolve the challenges that companies have through a human and machine combined kind of an offering. So with that, I thank you all for listening to me and for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions. You can see the website link and the email ID here. So if you have any questions or you would want to engage and understand in more detail about any of these aspects, I'm happy to
I
entertain
have
that.
one small question, sir. Surya. I am
Yes.
Kameshwara here from Hyderabad. I am a national auditor. Your product development is very good, but at what cost you are giving this product to an SME company having 250 crores turnover, manufacturing some steel items?
So you're asking what is the assessment cost for the company?
Yeah, this product, what you are giving, this is a product you are giving, isn't it? These are the features that product has got.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what
So
is the
so the
cost?
product, yeah. So the products are, it does not have any subscription cost. there is no subscription cost. It's free to use. It's on the website, so anyone can go and invite their partners at any point of time. The person who is doing the assessment, there can be two models. So one, the SSE, they often have to pay a small assessment token fee, which is very less, about 15 20,000 rupees on an average, which is quite less, and that's for the entire year and for all this support and hand holding, advisory, everything combined. So that's one. Otherwise, for companies who themselves say that, I want to get 50 of my vendors assessed and I will pay for all of them. So they have a, different kind of a pricing.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a per assessment kind of a thing, and it's not like a static recurring fee that you have each month. So you do it only once a year. So you pay for only that one assessment in that particular month. That's it. Other time you don't use it, you don't pay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay. Yes, no. Also, I see some questions in the chat, so I'll answer that. So, Mr. Venkateshwara, from I think Vellore, he's asking, are there any specific standards that are to be followed from MNCs or say European companies? How far this World Economic Forum standards are relevant and stuff? So yeah, to that, I think any standard or any specification, for example, there are many industry specific things. For example, the pharma sector companies, they have this thing called PSCI. So Pharma Sector Supply Chain Initiative, Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. So that is one additional layer of, sector specification that they need. So for all those kind of specifications and customization, it's very much possible to do that on the platform. So your questionnaire or your methodology can be modified accordingly to accommodate all that, and that's true for any other standard globally. Okay, I don't see any other question in the chat. Great. So thank you everyone again for taking out the time and joining the presentation. Uh, I guess I would give it back to the ICMI representative who's there on the call. Ma'am, you're there on the call with us. Uh, Back to you.
Social impact assessor registered under cost accountants. How can we do on our own the ESG audits to, like, you are having your own firm, but how can we start if we want to do something?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a difficult question for me, because it depends on the types and the authorizations that's required for different types of audits, ma'am. So I think that has to be a very specific kind of a thing. But overall, I think for ESG related assurances that we see, some of the credible standards, the accountability standards or the ISA standards. So they have a separate, examination and accreditation process that needs to be, cleared by few of the employees who are in the firm. Or if you're doing it as an individual assessor, you will have to have the accreditation. So at a firm level, we have that, and we have all those partnerships. That's why we are able to give out this assessments and this credibility.
Sir, in India, who is the certifying authority for the ESG audits?
Yeah.
Who
So
who
this
appoints for ESG audit and where the report has to be submitted? I mean, these are my few questions. Thank you.
yeah. No, so for if in India, the assurance or the audits that we are primarily doing for the annual reporting for the corporate sustainability. So of course, SEBI is requiring all this. So they do not have a specific accreditation. They are open to accepting the accountability standards that is the standard that we are using. There are also specific, ISO standards that you can have for if you're doing the only the social one, for example, the 26001 certification is also something that ISO, accreditation is something that many certification firms are going to provide. So that is a fair, credential. There is no India specific credential to the best of my knowledge yet. At least definitely not for the SEBI's reporting requirements.
The BRSR report is given, and who certifies that report then? The chartered accountants are taking that reports, or the
Mhm.
cost accountants?
Right. Yeah. So the standard, there is nothing India specific. That's what I'm saying. That for the BRSR, we are doing it based on accountability. Few other firms are doing it based on the ISA standards, the ISA 3000. So if you would look at the BRSR report, so they are requiring that, if you're taking an external assurance, and what is that assurance standard that you're using? So there, if you would see the disclosures of all the listed companies, they have written out that which standard they have used for the certification, and there it's mostly ISA or accountability. Okay, so I think if there aren't any further questions, I'll take your leave. So thank you everyone for joining, and I'll drop the email again so that if you want to have any further discussion, you can email me here, or I'm dropping my phone number also. You can definitely give me a call, and we can discuss specific things in more detail. And if I don't have an answer to something, of course, there are other members in my team who are looking at other aspects, so we can discuss those things as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking session, sir.